Welcome to Silicon Valley Successes. On today's episode, we have Ralph Leung, who is a former investment banker at Morgan Stanley, who has since gone on to create his own company, 88 Ships. It's a company that helps startups grow. So let's learn a little bit about him.
Welcome to Silicon Valley Successes. We interview experts and entrepreneurs to give the world access to the knowledge and experience that is here in Silicon Valley. Our mission is to create opportunities for those who seek them and help you to become the next Silicon Valley success.
Ralph, thank you for coming on Silicon Valley Successes.
Thanks for having me.
Can you give a brief introduction of yourself, who you are, what you're up to?
Sure. So as you mentioned earlier, I founded 88 Ships about a year and a half ago. 88 Ships is a growth and innovation platform focused on helping corporations find innovation and startups helping them grow and scale. Prior to that, I spent almost 20 years honing my career in a variety of strategic roles, everything from being an investment banker in New York and in Hong Kong, helping tech companies and fintech companies, from being a principal investor, principal M&A person, as well as being a strategy consultant.
Wow. So tell me about how that 20 years of experience kind of leads into 88 Ships. How did that help you with what you're doing now?
Right, well that's a good question. That was the real foundation of how I founded the company 88 Ships. And when I took a step back and looked back into my career and thought, okay, what have I learned over this 20-year path, right? I've worked with amazing leaders from enormous companies like Alibaba, right, to working with earlier stage startups all throughout Asia Pacific and even in the US. And I learned a significant amount of seeing companies make mistakes, seeing companies grow and then scale, seeing companies go from being an early stage startups to a growth equity company to become a public company.
Okay,
right?
some of that lingo that you're saying right there, some of the audience at home may not know it. What is growth equity and,
Sure.
and all that?
So early stage startups, right, which I understand a lot of your people on the show talk about, is slightly later than two guys, a dog, and an idea, right? Where you actually have a product, you have an early stage business, but you're finding that early traction, early business. Right. Growth equity is primarily in the phase right after that. You've raised a few rounds of capital. Okay. You are raising money so you can focus on scaling the business, right? Not to prove a concept, to prove whether it works or not. And then right after that, some companies tend to go public, right? If they choose to go public, listed on NYSE or NASDAQ, for example, they become publicly traded corporations.
Interesting. So when do you step in and start working with those companies?
On the 88 Ship side?
Yes.
So 88 Ships will typically step in the earlier stage of the business, where we'll work with people with oftentimes technical founders. Okay. They have a product, they have some early revenue, they have proven that there is a market fit for this, but they don't have a business built around it.
So if
that's
they
usually
just came out of an accelerator, is that still too early for you, or is that the right time?
That's typically the right time, right? So they've gone through either an incubator program, an accelerator program. They have something built, but they don't really have a team to focus on the business. They don't have the capital to hire a bunch of C-level executives around them to build the business. So 88 Ships would come in, and we help build that real business for them.
Okay, tell me more about how you help them build that business.
Sure. Okay, so when you take a step back, right, peel the onion on what makes a business successful. Okay. You have to start with a product, right? Yeah. So you have the core product, and that's what they ideally should have spent time focusing on building and making sure there's a product market fit, whether it's by themselves, through an incubator or an accelerator program. Okay. But around the product, you have to think of how do you go to market. Right. So how do you sell this? How do you sell the product? How do you take it to market? What really is your market?
This isn't necessarily just a physical product, right? It could be software.
It could be software. It could be something you see on Shark Tank. It could be it could be anything, but something that somebody would pay money for. It could be a service. It doesn't matter. Then you think about how you go to market. How do you sell it? How do you build your core competencies around the functional areas around it? So any good business, beyond the product and selling, you have to think finance, you have to think accounting, you have to think marketing, you think branding, you think advertising, you think legal, right? You think HR and recruiting talent and infrastructure and operations. All of these elements that really form around the product, that's what 88 Ship focuses on. Now, every company is a little bit different. Right? Some companies may, depending on the founder or the founding team, they may have certain expertise on certain areas. So we usually spend time studying the company, working with the founding team, understanding where the biggest gaps are. We can come in and we help them out in the areas.
Now, everything you just mentioned there, you can't do that alone, obviously. Right. tell me about your team.
Sure. So well, let's take a step back, right? There are plenty of great players in the market, especially in Silicon Valley, that help startups, right?
Yep.
You look at the list of incubators, accelerators, just one every 4 blocks. You know?
Yeah.
So there are definitely a lot of players in the market. The way that we want to differentiate ourselves is take an execution approach to helping startups grow. So not an education approach, right? Which is typically the approaches that accelerators, incubators do, that they follow because they run big batches.
Okay.
We don't run big batches, right? We go bespoke, one-on-one, 8 companies a year maximum on the startup side, and we
Okay.
take a very hands-on execution-based approach to helping them scale.
Okay. So tell me about when you meet one of these startups for the first time. What does that look like? You just sit down with the founder and go, hey, I saw your product and you're not doing anything with it. I think we can make you guys something. Or is it they come to you and like, hey, we've tried all these things. We don't know what we're doing.
It's a combination of both, right? And there's a third element. So we haven't done any advertising or marketing. Everything's through referral.
Okay.
Right? So it usually comes through someone. Maybe it's a friend of yours, a friend of a friend, someone that we worked with in the past. They come through our referral channels. You know, they say, hey, so and so has a company. You know, he or she started a company. They have a great product. Just came out of whatever accelerator program. They're thinking about doing a Series A or a Series B fundraise, or they're really struggling trying to get in front of a large corporation to try to sell the big enterprise deal, right? Then when we sit down, first meeting is like this. It's just one-on-one, get to know each other. Well, first we have to see if we get along.
Okay.
Right? Because if you
So
don't like
not
me
like
and I
this
don't like
meeting.
you, so yeah, this is not working out.
Yeah, no.
Right?
Let's retake that.
You know, but it's to understand each other.
Okay.
Right? Just to see if we get along, giving you a chance to understand what it is that you're struggling with, what you are trying to accomplish, right? And then after this first meeting, then we have a second meeting. Right? What typically they do is the startup would send us information, right? So this is your typical.
What type of information? Is this marketing information or
No,
what?
it would just be your typical diligence pack, right? So again,
What's the diligence pack?
for companies that we have that haven't gone through a certain stage yet, I don't expect them to have a lot, but I do expect them to have at least some semblance of a business plan.
Okay.
Not necessarily the traditional 50-page Word document business plan that people may be familiar with. It could be a set of slides that they've used to capture notes.
So like a 15 deck slide, that would be enough for you?
Yeah, or
15,
give me
slide
something,
deck.
right?
Okay.
Give me something to show that you've thought about your business, thought about your product, thought about your roadmap, right? It doesn't have to be fully baked. It doesn't have to be fully developed. That's what we would help you with.
Okay.
But give me something where I can go home, study your business with my team, right? Understanding where your challenges are, give us a chance to assess what we think about your business, right? Because we approach it just like we're investors.
Really?
Because we only spend time with 8 companies maximum a year.
Okay.
Same way that a VC would have X amount of capital for them to invest in per year. Same
Okay.
concept. So you have to be very picky about who you want to work with. And this is a long-term partnership. We're not consultants, right? We don't come in, do a 3-month McKinsey-style project, and then we take off. Like, you never see us again. That's not how we operate. So we operate as if we're partners together, which means we're in it for the long term, which also means we have to get along well. We have to really believe in the business, believe in the founding team.
Interesting. So let's go back. Say you've met that startup. You get along with them. You want to help with them. The first thing they say to you is, we don't have money, or we're trying to raise money right now. What information does a startup founder need to know about raising capital?
That's a really good question, and I think there's a lot of confusion in the market, depending on the stage, right? Just based on the stages that we talked about before. I think with technology these days, a lot of people can look up Quora, they can go to Google and just look up what do you need in a fundraise deck, right? What do you need in a pitch deck? And they follow certain guidelines. Now, my advice to founders that are going through this process is take a step back first. Understand fundraising is not a one-shot deal. It's an ongoing effort as you continue to grow the company. Right? And your goal is not to raise money. Right? Your goal is not to raise, just let me get my A round, let me get my seed round. Your goal is to build a business. So what do you have to do to build a business successfully over time? Right? I think that's the first step that any founder needs to think through before they think, okay, how do we raise money? I get that there's pressure. If a founder doesn't, they have 3 months of runway left, 6 months of runway left, they feel that pressure.
What does that mean?
Amount of money to keep your lights on for the next X number of months.
Okay, so they only have 3 months of runway.
Right.
Do they even have time to raise funding then?
Well, that's the first mistake I would have pointed them out, right? If you only have 3 months of runway, that means you started planning a little bit too late. Right? You always have to start thinking about it from day one. As you're thinking about building a product, you also think about how do you have your source of capital, and for how long, and it's an ongoing process. Right? Always think about it as an ongoing long-term process.
So how much of your work with these startups is actually just sitting there and saying, this is your next 1 year roadmap. Let's break it down step by step.
Right. It's a large portion of what we do. Right? We help them think very strategically about how to build a company. Right? We try to get them away from a short-term, let us sell X number of products, get 10,000 users, raise $5 million, right? Like, these are very short-term goals. We help them think about what is a 3-year roadmap, and then you back into, right? If for us to be this when we grow up in 3 years, okay, in 2 years, here's what we want to do. In 1 year, this will be what we want to do. And how do you back into what do we have to do today to set us up till we can get to the 3-year mark, not the 6-month mark?
Okay, so a lot of it is goal setting.
Oh yeah, it's thinking about what the goals are, but also what is the execution roadmap? Like, how do we actually accomplish what our goals are, rather than just saying, you know what, in 3 years I want to be top 3 in the market.
Yeah.
That's not a goal.
If someone came to you with this dream, hey, I have a 3-year plan, and as you're talking to that person, their 3-year plan is just that goal at the end, and working step by step backwards, there's just so much information there that's not there. What happens in a situation like that?
So, remember I mentioned earlier our typical vetting process, right? We don't take applications, but we have a 2.5 meeting process. First meeting is what we talked about, is let's just get along, right? Let's just understand each other, what our priorities are, what our values are, what drives us.
Okay.
Second meeting is we have a follow-up and we deep dive into the business based on what you send me.
Okay.
So we look at your pitch deck, we look at whatever materials that you have, we look at your Excel models, right? So we understand your finances and we understand your roadmap.
Okay.
And if that still works, then the last 0.5 of meeting, we discuss what our working arrangement or the scope of work is going to look like. To answer your question, though, what happens if someone or founding team says we have a very ambitious goal in 3 years, but we have no idea how to get there?
Yeah.
Typically, we would get a good sense of that during the first meeting. Right?
Okay.
And if it's that far away, then we think that a company like that may be a little too early for us.
Okay.
Right? Because we typically work with companies that have done enough. Right, enough of the legwork, enough of the struggles to really understand building a company is not easy. You can't just outsource a hired gun to come and do it for you. Right? You have to go through the struggles yourself. But at the same time, we also understand that you don't have to do it all by yourself. Right? So once you've done enough, right, to get the product into the market, get some early revenue, early users, early pilots, and in order for you to accomplish that, chances are you would have thought through what your roadmap is going to look like, even at a high level. Then we come in and actually stress test that model for you.
So how important is it for the founder to be coachable in this situation?
It's extremely, extremely important, right? Because if you're not coachable, then why have us with you anyway, right? Then we just become hired gun to simply execute. We want to work with the team. But it's the same thing as the way that a VC would think about it, right? Would I invest money into a company where the founder or the founding team would not listen to any of the advice? Are they just looking for a check? And some VCs may be okay with that, but I'd say most of them would prefer to work with founders who are coachable, because building businesses are hard, right? No one really knows all the answers, so you have to work with a team.
How important is it for the CEO to have kind of a financial background? Your background's from investment banking.
Yes.
Go a little bit more detail about that aspect of it, just the financial modeling, how important it is for a founder, where they could maybe develop this area.
Yeah.
Just basically to have a conversation with investors, because I'm guessing if they don't know the cap table or kind of the structure, that meeting might be lost.
No, that's a good question. Right? So I'd say most of the founders that we work with don't come from finance.
Okay.
They don't come from finance. They're not former accountants or investment bankers or anyone in that world. They're typically product folks. Right? They have either engineers or they're product managers. They know the product, right? Because they have an idea. They have an idea, they want to come up with something, so they have the product. To answer your question, I would say it's not critical, it's helpful. Right? It's helpful because, like you said, right, it's typically the CEO, the founders who pitch, right? Because the investors want to hear from the CEO, they want to hear from the founders. They want to feel confident that the CEO, the founding team, has an appreciation for finance, for cash flow, for working capital, because the number one reason why.
Talk about working capital. What is that?
Working capital is how much money you got coming in and how much money you got going out, right? On a net basis, are you working capital positive, which means you're collecting more than you are spending, right? Which gives you more runway, or vice versa. You're spending a lot more than you're collecting, which means your time's going to run out soon, right? So any founder has to have a basic appreciation of managing cash.
Interesting.
Right. So you don't have to be finance, PhD to be a good founder, but you have to have an appreciation for the importance of managing your money.
How important is it that the CEO has that respect, I guess, for money versus the CFO? Say there's a team of 4, CEO, CFO, CTO, sales guy, I don't know.
Yeah.
CFO, CEO, that kind of relationship right there.
Right. Okay, so let's unpack that question a little bit, right? For a typical startup at an early stage, you're not going to have 4 C-level titles.
Oh, 4 guys have named themselves
Right.
C-level titles.
Right. So if it's a nice team though, if it's a nice team, nice blended team where you know the CEO, the CFO, and you name the other C-suites, they have complementary skill sets, that would be very helpful. But in my opinion, it's still very helpful for the CEO, right? Like the person who is building the business to have some basic understanding of it. Right? And again, we're not talking accounting principles, we're not talking revenue recognition and you know, those detailed finance and accounting topics, you know, but an appreciation on how do you manage money, because ultimately that's who investors are going to trust.
It's interesting that you brought up the word trust. We had a guest on last week's episode, Phil, who talked about how important trust was in the whole sales cycle. Right. So it's kind of interesting how that gets repeatedly brought up in business, the trust factor.
Absolutely, especially for early stage companies, right? So going back to the phases that I talked about, early stage companies, growth equity when you're older, and then public or just large corporations. When you're in the early stage, it's all about trust. Right? You have to believe that the founding team has the ability to execute, that they're coachable, that you can trust the founding team to deliver, right? Because you're early. You don't really have much more than the founding team to be able to get investors to be comfortable. Right? When you're a more developed company, then you can actually look at business results. You can look at KPIs. You can look at what the company has accomplished and what's in the growth pipeline. But when you're early stage, trust is critical.
Interesting. And let's go back to your life's roadmap.
Okay.
I'm kind of curious about it. So you formed 88 Ships.
Yes.
What was the desire to form it? And why not stay in the investment banking world? I mean, it's a pretty cushy area from my understanding. You know, died at
depends
age
how you define
45 of
cushy,
a heart
right?
attack.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
You know, minor coke habit, whatever, you know.
No comment.
Yeah.
That's a good question about why I wanted to take a step back and start 88 Ships.
Yeah.
You know, I reflected on my own career path. You know, after 20 years of thinking about, okay, where do I want to spend the next 20 years? Where can I actually add the most value, be the most impactful to people I work with, to companies I work with? Is it continue to do more deals, which I very much enjoyed, right? Working with very large corporations around the world, I learned a ton from, added significant value. Or is it to take that knowledge, take that skill set, and work with earlier stage companies that typically don't have access to the same caliber of help, typically don't have access to the same type of advice, right? Someone or a team who has worked with Fortune 100 companies and say, hey, Sean, this is not how you do it, right? Or have you thought about this? Or to put in that level of sophistication much earlier than you typically would be able to afford, but to set you up for success, right? It's the name of your show.
With that, if you want more information on Silicon Valley Successes, please visit our website, siliconvalleysuccesses.com. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. But with that, let's go back to Ralph and learn a little bit more. So Ralph, tell me a little bit about, you know, what startups, some of the mistakes they make early that might cost them later.
Well, so let's talk about fundraising for a quick second.
Perfect.
Right. I think oftentimes startups think about valuation, right? And for whatever that's worth, maybe just people focus a lot on the internet, or
Question
people
on
talk
that,
about
how
it.
do startups even come up with their valuations?
Depending on the stage of the company, right? You can have a variety of metrics where you can peg it to, you know, how many users you have, how much revenue you have, what's your monthly recurring revenue. You know, because startups typically aren't profitable, right? So you're not able to use your traditional valuation metrics that later stage companies would use, right? You hear about PE multiples and all these other multiples. Typically doesn't really work for early stage
All this jargon
companies.
people can look up on Google.
Yeah. So, you know, like for early stage companies, you know, it's a little bit looser, but also comes down to economics 101, supply and demand, right? Depending on how much investors believe in your company and the future potential of your company, you know, how many investors are flocking to it, you know, it's supply and demand, right? They could potentially drive up valuation that your company itself may not be able to defend. So to answer your question, typically I see it as a common mistake, right? Because early founders are so focused on, I want to maximize my valuation right away. Right?
Yeah.
So even before they can really defend it, because going back to what I said at the beginning of the show is fundraising is not a one-shot deal. You got to think of it long-term, but you have to think about fundraising in parallel to building a business long-term. If you overstretch on your valuation too early, what does that set you up for in your next round? Potentially a down round, potentially a flat round, or your pressure to deliver because you got such a high valuation.
Can you talk about down round, flat round real quick? Just
Sure. So let's say, Sean, you have an amazing company. You did your very first round at a $10 million valuation. So investors said, I want to buy 25% of your company at a $10 million valuation. But that's more than what you really deserve today, right? Because you have 4 users. People are just investing in you because it's Sean, right?
97 users?
Right, 97 users, so that's quite a lot of money per user.
Yeah.
But that's a very high valuation. Now, fast forward 6 months, you say you go back to these investors and new investors and say, you know what, we need more money because we need to grow. They'll say, Sean, where have you gone with your 97 users? Well, I've gone from 97 to 100. I say, well, okay, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But from a valuation perspective, you haven't really accomplished that much more. So I'm going to invest either at the same valuation, which would be a flat round, or I would say, you know what, Sean, I gave you all this money, you just kind of blew it, and you didn't really grow your user base, you didn't generate much more. I would only invest, instead of a 10 million valuation, I'm going to value at 5 million.
Wow.
So that's a down round.
So you have to give up a ton of your company then to get the same amount of the money.
If you can even raise a round, right? Because these are just red flags all over the place.
Okay.
Which goes back to, should you have taken that valuation at 10 million? Maybe, maybe not, right?
What's your opinion then of startups raising money maybe too early? I mean, should they try to raise as soon as possible?
How do you define too early?
When they're about to run, should they wait till they're about to run out of money before accepting a check, or should they from day one be on the road trying to raise things?
I would recommend the latter, right? I'm a huge fan of planning. And I understand when you're building a business, especially for a startup, things don't really work out as planned more often than not, right? But having a plan, being thoughtful, having a roadmap is super important in my opinion, right? And then you're still putting the pieces together as you go along, right?
Okay.
But having some plan to go for, right? Just like you're jumping off a cliff and you're trying to build a plane at the same time. But having a plan before you jump off the cliff would be helpful, right? So in terms of raising money, same thing. Don't wait until the last minute because people can smell you're desperate, right?
So before we had, I think it was episode 9, we had a group on that talked about pivoting and the importance of pivoting as a startup.
Okay.
How important is that? Say you have that 3-year plan. You've worked it out. These are the steps to get there. After year 1, you go, okay, guys, we're not where we should be. The market's telling us this.
Yes.
In your opinion, how important is it to pivot, and what happens in that situation? Do you then alter that whole 3-year period? I know it depends on the situation, case by case.
Right.
But in that situation, in pivoting and your team coming in, reevaluating everything, how does that go?
I think it depends on why you're pivoting.
Okay.
Right. Is it because your original strategy failed, right? Or something has changed? Or is it because the market dynamic has changed? Is it because you found other opportunities that may be a better product market fit for you? Right? It depends, right? Are you being proactive or reactive to something good or to something bad? So that's my investment banking answer to your question, Neville. It really depends. But what I would say though, it is very important that the founding team is open-minded, like you mentioned earlier. Are they coachable, right? Open-minded, coachable to consider a pivot, and maybe it doesn't have to be a full pivot. Maybe it can just be slight turn.
Okay. So a little bit of recap on what we've talked about today so far. We've had Ralph Leung, investment banking background. He's now the founder of 88 Ships. They have a full team that comes in and helps these companies actually plan out their goals, 3-year plans, step by step, work with coachable founders that have just possibly gone out of accelerators or have some type of product market fit. We've talked about raising funds and what kind of a mindset, what they need to know, a little bit about information, what they need to have prepared, overvaluation, flat rounds, down rounds. We've talked about runway, a lot of terms that were thrown out there today. So go back in this episode and go on our website for more information on those terms and to review things. But with that being said, Ralph, what have we missed on this conversation? What important question do you often get asked?
So I would recommend for founders, when given the opportunity to have help, right? Think really hard about receiving that help.
Okay.
As in, yes, it may cost you a little bit today, right? Or yes, it may come earlier and you may feel like you're busy with so many things. Right? But getting the right type of help is super important to supercharging that growth.
Well, the question on that one, how do you even know if it is the right type of help?
Well, number one, as you're building a company, you want to try to surround yourself with really good people, right? That includes your advisors.
So
that includes
88 ships?
Right, so that could be a plug.
All right.
But as you're thinking about building a team around you, right? It could be a media team, it could be your advisors, it could be your board members, definitely your investors. This becomes your sounding board as you're thinking about, okay, am I bringing in the right help? Right? This could be full-time senior hires, junior hires, consultants, platforms like ours that would come in, because this type of help can really supercharge the growth of a business, right? And I've seen many, many times where founders are saying, we're very much interested, but we're so busy with something super myopic, right? Super narrow, super myopic, and they're forgetting about the forest.
Wow. So Ralph, with that, we have about a minute left. Could you talk about, one, how people can contact you, who your ideal client is, and anything else you want people to know?
Sure. My contact information is Ralph at 88ships, so that's 88ships.com. The companies I typically work with, all technology-based. There are 3 sectors that I typically focus on. One is consumer tech, the other is internet, which includes marketplaces and networks, and the third is fintech. And in terms of the stage of the business, we typically work with fairly early stage companies that have raised a little bit of money themselves, so their initial seed round, a couple $1 million, that have a product in the market already, that are generating early revenue or pilots with a client, that feel like they have figured out the product market fit, and they say, you know what, we're ready for that next stage that's really focused on growth rather than fit. That's where we come in and can supercharge.
Ralph, this was an amazing episode. There's so much information. So everyone at home, please visit us at Silicon Valley Successes, and we look forward to next week's episode. We have some amazing guests, and we're here to help you. We want to make sure that you become the next success.
Thank you from all of us at Silicon Valley Successes. We hope you found the information presented today useful in your path to success. For further information on accessing the resources in Silicon Valley, you may visit us on the web at siliconvalleysuccesses.com, on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you. And remember, we want to help you in your journey to become the next success.